In the old world, we built to defy nature. We used stone and steel to wall ourselves off from the wild, but the library saw a different path. They asked, what if a building didn't just stand there? What if it breathed? Theory 11 was the end of the Gray City. By 600 AD, architecture had become a branch of biology. The empire stopped mining the earth and started cultivating it. Behold the bioluminescent grid, no more soot-stained lamps or coal-fired hearths. The walls themselves glow with the pulse of engineered algae, turning wastewater into light. The city at night doesn't burn, it blooms. The air you breathe inside a Pharos-class spire isn't filtered by machines, it's scrubbed by the vertical agronomy. Tiered gardens wrap every tower, a closed-loop respiratory system where human breath feeds the plants and the plants feed the people. And look closer at the stone, this is self-healing concrete. Infused with dormant volcanic bacteria, it doesn't crack or crumble with age. It calcifies, it grows stronger with every rain. A bridge built in the 6th century isn't an antique. It's a living monument that's just reaching its prime. There is no waste here, no landfills, only the material ledger. Every brass fitting and marble slab is tracked by the ether-link, waiting to be reborn into the next design. In Alexandria's world, to build is to participate in an eternal cycle. Humanity no longer lives as a parasite on the planet. We have become its gardeners. We don't just inhabit the landscape. We are the heartbeat of the ecosystem. In our timeline, the Industrial Revolution led to gray cities, concrete jungles of smog, soot, and ecological destruction. In the Alexandria Survives timeline, the marriage of Theory 5, mechanical biology, and Theory 10, algorithmic federalism, creates the theory of sustainable architecture. By 600 AD, the empire treats a city not as a collection of buildings, but as a synthetic organism. Architecture is no longer about conquering nature, but about perfectly mimicking its metabolic efficiency. 1. The bioluminescent grid. 620 AD. In the Alexandria Survives timeline, the transition to the bioluminescent grid in 620 AD represents the moment the empire moves beyond burning resources to cultivating energy. While our world struggled with the soot of gas lamps and the massive infrastructure of copper wiring, the library looked to the sea and the forest to solve the problem of darkness. 1. The algae glass infrastructure. The core of the grid was the Pharospane, a double-layered glass brick infused with a nutrient-rich hyperoxygenated saline solution. The organism, using selective breeding and early mechanical biology Theory 5, Alexandrian life rights, isolated a strain of Pyrocystes fusiformis bioluminescent dinoflagellates that could survive in temperate urban environments. The mechanism: these organisms emit light when agitated. Roman engineers integrated micropistons into the building's plumbing. As water moved through the pipes, it created a gentle, rhythmic vibration in the glass panels, triggering a constant, soft blue glow. 2. The metabolic exchange. The grid wasn't just a lighting system, it was a waste management solution. Nitrogen recycling. The algae panels were hooked into the building's gray water systems. The nitrogen and phosphorus from organic waste acted as a primary fertilizer for the light-emitting colonies. The breath of the city. As a byproduct of their metabolism, these millions of panels absorbed CO2 and released pure oxygen into the urban corridors. Walking through a Roman city in 620 AD felt like walking through a high-oxygen rainforest. 3. The solar charging cycle. During the day, the buildings appeared to have translucent, emerald green skins. Photosynthesis. The algae spent the daylight hours absorbing solar energy and multiplying. Night shift. At sunset, a central ether-link signal Theory 7 would trigger a slight increase in the steam-powered agitation frequency. The entire city would wake up, transitioning from deep green to a vibrant ethereal azure. 4. Psychological and ecological impact. Circadian harmony. Unlike the harsh, flickering yellow of gas or the blue light of modern LEDs, the bioluminescent glow followed a natural, pulsing frequency. This significantly reduced urban stress and insomnia among the citizenry. Zero heat waste. Traditional bulbs waste up to 90% of their energy as heat. The bioluminescent grid produced cold light, meaning cities didn't suffer from the heat island effect common in our modern metropolises. The final result of the grid by 650 AD, the bioluminescent grid had rendered fossil fuel lighting obsolete. One, energy sovereignty. Every building was its own power plant. If the central steam grid failed, the lights stayed on as long as there were people living inside to provide the metabolic fuel. 2. Atmospheric scrubbing. The city of Rome alone was estimated to produce more oxygen than a forest 10 times its size. 3. The aesthetic of the future. The empire stopped looking like an industrial machine and started looking like a living coral reef, a biological beacon visible even from the early orbital probes. 2. Passive steam climate control. By the mid-7th century, the empire had solved the problem of the desert heat and the northern cold without burning a single extra ounce of fuel for heating or cooling. They achieved this by evolving the ancient Roman hypocaust into a sophisticated system of fractal thermal engineering. One, the lung of the building. Architects at the Library of Alexandria realized that traditional walls were dead barriers. To create a sustainable city, buildings needed to act like giant, self-regulating lungs. The design, inspired by the internal structures of termite mounds, buildings were constructed with a network of hollow, interconnected breathing channels within the masonry. The physics, using the difference engine theory 6, they calculated the exact diameter of these channels to exploit the stack effect, where hot air naturally rises, creating a vacuum that pulls cooler air from underground chambers. 2. High-pressure suction cooling. In hotter climates like Egypt or Mesopotamia, the empire utilized steam-induced convection. The tech, a single high-pressure steam pipe powered by the city's central solar thermal plant, was run up the center of a building's chimney. The result, the steam jet moving upward at high velocity created a low-pressure zone, the Venturi effect, sucking hot air out of every room in the building. This allowed a villa in the Sahara to maintain a constant, breezy 21/circ/text $C even during a heat wave. 3. Thermal mass reservoirs. To handle the freezing winters of the Gallic and Germanic frontiers, the empire used phase-change materials. The material, floors and walls were filled with thermal salts, a liquid mineral slurry that absorbed heat from the sun during the day. The release, as the temperature dropped at night, the salts would slowly solidify, releasing their stored latent heat back into the rooms. The efficiency, this meant that even if the steam grid went offline for maintenance, the building would remain warm for up to 48 hours. For the hygroscopic skin, to manage humidity, the exterior of the buildings were clad in porous volcanic tuff or limestone treated with a special saline wash. The function, in the morning the walls would drink the dew from the air. The evaporative cooling, as the sun hit the building, the water evaporated, cooling the stone surface by up to 10/circ/text $C, acting exactly like a human being sweating to stay cool. The final result of passive steam tech by 660 AD, the climate struggle was over. 1. Massive energy savings. Cooling and heating, which consume the majority of energy in our 21st century, cost the empire zero operational energy. 2. Healthier living. Unlike modern AC, which recirculates stale air, the passive steam system provided a constant 100% exchange of fresh, filtered air every hour. 3. The silent city. Without the hum of fans or the roar of furnaces, the living cities of the empire were eerily quiet, dominated only by the sound of wind and the pulsing glow of the algae grid. 3. The cradle-to-cradle material ledger. By 650 AD, the empire reached a realization. A sustainable civilization cannot exist in a straight line, extract, right arrow, use, right arrow, discard. It must exist in a circle. Under the direction of the library, the empire abolished the concept of trash and replaced it with a digital physical tracking system called the material ledger. 1. The self-healing foundation. The building block of this era was biocementum, an evolution of ancient Roman concrete. The catalyst. The mix was infused with dormant Sporosarsina pasturae bacteria and tiny capsules of calcium lactate. The reaction, when a crack formed and water seeped in, the bacteria woke up, consumed the lactate, and excreted solid limestone, effectively knitting the building back together. The life cycle: buildings weren't meant to be replaced, they were meant to be permanent. A foundation laid in 650 AD was expected to still be standing in 2650 AD. 2. The phonetic serial number. Every structural element, every brass valve, marble slab, and glass pane was stamped with a unique phonetic glyph from Theory 9. The Ethelink log. This glyph was a physical hyperlink. By scanning it with a light stylus, an architect could see the item's entire history, where it was mined, how many times it had been reused, and its exact alloy composition. The property shift. Under the 159th Constitution, you didn't own the raw materials in your house, you leased them from the global commons. When you moved or renovated, the materials had to be returned to the ledger. 3. The molecular forge. Recycling. 2. For materials that couldn't be easily reused, like worn-out clothing or broken tools, the empire used steam thermal dissolution. The process, high-pressure, superheated steam, was used to break down organic fibers and polymers into their base chemical components. The result, a tattered linen tunic could be broken down and respun into high-strength architectural insulation without any loss in quality. 4. The demolition ban. By 670 AD, destroying a building became a crime against the state. A deconstruction. Instead of wrecking balls, crews used acoustic dissolvers, vibrational tools tuned to the resonant frequency of the mortar, allowing stones to be lifted out perfectly intact. The harvest. Old buildings were seen as urban mines. A 100-year-old bathhouse might be carefully disassembled to provide the pre-stressed granite for a new Etha tower. The final result of Phase 3, the material ledger, changed the human relationship with the physical world. 1. Resource depletion. By 700 AD, the empire had stopped mining the earth for 80% of its needs, relying instead on the circulating mass already in the system. 2. Generational wealth. Because buildings grew stronger over time and materials never lost value, a family's home became a permanent, self-maintaining asset. 3. The planetary archive. The ledger allowed the library to calculate the exact mass of the civilization, a crucial step for planning the massive weight requirements of Project Selene, the moon mission. 4. Vertical hanging agronomy. By 675 AD, the political laboratory, Theory 10, faced a crisis: urban density. With billions of people flocking to the high-tech hubs, the empire couldn't afford to waste land on horizontal farming. The solution was to turn every building into a self-sustaining calorie factory. 1. The green envelope. Architects stopped using stone or solid glass for the outer skins of skyscrapers. Instead, they used the hydrolattice. The tech, a series of tiered, transparent brass-end glass troughs that wrapped around the building like a spiral staircase. The symbiosis, plants were grown aeroponically in the air. A nutrient-rich mist, created by the building's passive steam exhaust, Theory 11.2, was sprayed directly onto the roots. The yield, because the plants had 360-degree access to sunlight and controlled weather inside the lattice, they produced 6 harvests per year compared to the traditional one. 2. The respiratory exchange. The most profound breakthrough was the realization that humans and plants are perfect biological mirrors. Eco 2. Scrubbing. The stale air from the offices and apartments, rich in human exhaled CO2, was pumped into the green envelope. Oxygen enrichment. The plants inhaled the CO2 and exhaled pure oxygen back into the building's ventilation system. The result, residents of these hanging towers reported higher cognitive function and near-zero respiratory illness due to the hyperoxygenated environment. 3. Aquaponic basements. The loop was closed in the foundations of the buildings. The protein, massive steam-heated tanks in the sublevels housed genetically optimized tilapia and Nile perch. The nutrient loop, fish waste, was filtered out of the water and used as the primary fertilizer for the hanging gardens on the 50th floor. The plants, in turn, purified the water before it was sent back down to the fish. The output, a single 100-story tower could provide enough vegetables, fruit, and fish to feed 20,000 citizens indefinitely with 0 transport costs. For the floral clock, because the buildings were living organisms, they changed with the seasons and the time of day. Pollination, miniature steam-stabilized bee drones, mechanical biological hybrids ensured that even the highest floors remained fertile. Visual beauty. Cities didn't look like industrial zones. They looked like the hanging gardens of Babylon expanded to a planetary scale. At night, the bioluminescent algae theory 11.1 would illuminate the purple and green foliage, creating a neon jungle aesthetic. The final result of Phase 4, by 710 AD, vertical agronomy had decoupled the human diet from the weather. 1. Famine erasure. For the first time in history, a bad harvest became a mathematical impossibility. 2. Land reclamation. With food growing up instead of out, the empire returned 40% of its former farmland to the wild, allowing for a global reforestation that further stabilized the climate. 3. The gardener citizen. Every citizen, from the engineer to the auditor, spent a mandatory hour a week tending to their building's gardens, a practice that kept the population physically fit and mentally grounded in nature. 5. The Pharos, standard for urban density. By 725 AD, the Alexandria timeline moved beyond the sprawl of ancient cities. Inspired by the Pharos of Alexandria, the empire adopted a circular, high-density urban model. This wasn't just for aesthetics, it was a mathematical solution to the transportation crisis that plagues our 2026. In their world, the road became as obsolete as the chariot. 1. The hub-and-spoke geometry. Cities were built as perfect concentric circles, limited to a 5-kilometer diameter to ensure everything remained within a human scale. The core, the Pharos. At the center stood a massive white marble spire that served as the Ethelink hub, the library node, and the central steam governor. The rings, inner ring, administration, research, and high art. Middle ring, high density, hanging gardens, residential towers, theory 11.4. Outer ring, light, molecular forges, and recreational, wild zones. To the death of the street. Because the cities were so dense and efficient, there was no need for horses, carriages, or cars. The parks, what we call streets, were replaced by public commons, winding streams, orchards, and walking paths. The acoustic environment. Without the roar of engines, cities became centers of sound healing. You could hear a bird sing from the 80th floor of a residential tower. 3. The pneumatic arteries. Theory 3. Evolution. For travel that required more than a 10-minute walk, the empire utilized the subsurface transit grid. The tech beneath the parks lay a network of vacuum-sealed pneumatic tubes. The experience, a citizen stepped into a pressurized brass capsule and using the pressure differentials of the city's central steam grid, they were pulsed to any other point in the city in under 120 seconds. The intercity bridge, these tubes extended between cities, allowing for supersonic steam travel across continents. For the zero-commute lifestyle under the Pharaoh standard, the commute was viewed as a failure of logic. The design, work, education, and living spaces were integrated into the same hanging tower. The result, most citizens lived within 300 meters of their primary social and professional nodes. This freed up an average of 3 hours per day for every human being, hours that were reinvested into the Great Debate, Theory 10, and scientific exploration. Sustainable architecture ensured that the empire grew up and in rather than out, leaving the rest of the planet to breathe. The final result of Theory 11, sustainable architecture, is the realization of the symbiotic city. By 800 AD, the empire has successfully decoupled human expansion from environmental destruction. Architecture is no longer a dead shell of stone and steel. It is a living, breathing extension of the Earth's own ecosystem. The planet has become a global garden where high-tech urban centers function with the efficiency of a coral reef and the cleanliness of a mountain spring. The metabolic megalopolis, the most profound result is that the city has become a net positive entity. A carbon-negative living, through the combination of bioluminescent algae and vertical agronomy, a Roman Egyptian city in 800 AD actually removes more CO2 from the atmosphere and produces more oxygen than the wild forest that stood there before. Energy autonomy. By utilizing passive steam climate control and metabolic energy, cities have zero energy debt. They do not pull power from the earth, they capture and recycle the heat and light already present in the environment. To the era of deep permanence, Theory 11 ended the cycle of build and destroy. The 1,000-year standard, because of self-healing concrete and the material ledger, the cost of a building is amortized over a millennium. Architectural wisdom, instead of starting from scratch every 50 years, architects in 800 AD tune existing structures. Buildings are seen as family and community ancestors, entities that grow wiser and more efficient as they age. 3. The restoration of the wild, because the Pharaoh standard mandated extreme vertical density. The physical footprint of humanity on Earth actually shrank as the population grew. The Great Reforestation. With 90% of the population living in hyper-efficient circular cities and food growing in vertical towers, the vast plains and forests of Europe, Africa, and Asia were returned to nature. The biodiversity boom, humanity became a keystone species that actively managed the planet's health through the etholink and mechanical biology, reversing extinctions and stabilizing the climate. Theory 11 proved that technology is not the enemy of nature, it is the fulfillment of it. The empire didn't just survive the industrial bottleneck that nearly choked our 20th century, it bypassed it entirely. By 800 AD, the human habitat was so perfectly integrated with the planet that the transition to space habitats became a simple matter of moving a living cell from the Earth to the stars. With the Earth healed and the society harmonized, the empire now looks across the sea.